Good morning, everybody, and welcome to Bugbears and Brews. My name is Brian, and today we're talking about D&D 5th Edition Inspiration. We're going to be covering some of the basics. What is inspiration? How is it given? How is it used? As well as some alternative methods of how to grant it, and then some additional methods of how to implement inspiration, additional uses for it. On top of that, I'm going to go into a little bit of ways to prod your player into using inspiration, because one of the biggest faults I see with it is people forget that it's there. So let's get to it. So let's go ahead and talk about the basics of inspiration, shall we? So inspiration is a mechanic that allows a player to grant themselves or an allied creature advantage on a roll. This could be a save, a check, an attack roll, any of those kinds of rolls, or impose disadvantage on an enemy's roll. Once again, that can be save, attack, check, and so on. Additionally, inspiration is used through a mechanic called inspiration die, and a player can only ever have one inspiration die at a time. This keeps them from hoarding up all those inspiration dice and unloading a slew of advantage or disadvantage during key moments of the game. Not saying that you can have more than one inspiration per party, but only each member can only have one inspiration. So you can have Joe, Bill, and Tom all have inspiration. They each have 1 point to use, but Bill can't have 3 of them. The most any player can have is 1. And inspiration is awarded through smart roleplay. So playing up the character's backstory, ideal, bonds, flaws, traits, as well as their campaign character development progression. Because let's be honest here, what the player starts with on that character sheet at level 1 by no means matches up with what they're doing at level 6. Maybe they overcame a fear of spiders, and now instead of having that fear of spiders, they want to absolutely demolish all spiders. Additionally, inspiration shouldn't be given out for metagaming or for manipulation of the game through smart mechanic use. If those situations fall in place of what the character would do, I could see using inspiration or granting inspiration for that, but just manipulating and using game mechanics to give an outcome that the way you want, just because of smart play, doesn't mean that that's something that's worthy of inspiration, at least in my book. Of course, all these are adjustable by table and how you guys want to run it. The other thing that I don't grant inspiration for, and some people kind of had a struggle for this at the start, was I don't give inspiration for what tabletop gaming with Juice labels as your action movie sequences. So this is an example of like a monk running up a wall, doing a backflip behind a bad guy, and then kicking the bad guy in the head as he lands his perfect backflip. Yeah, that's cool. It's great flavor text. It adds some of the visual appeal of the combat. But to me, that's not really an inspiration worthy. That's just having a creative mind of how combat is done. So that being said, let's dive a little bit deeper into the inspiration well and talk about some alternative methods. Having talked about some of the basics of inspiration, I'm going to go ahead and cover a little bit of the alternatives and additions that I do at my table. So the first one is how inspiration is given out. From the basic standpoint and looking at the player handbook, it's a mechanic that's awarded through the DM. However, I already have enough on my plate between all my DM duties that I shifted that duty onto the players. So it's kind of inspiration awarded via committee. Players listen to the role play, and if they say, you know what, that matches up with what your character does, it's kind of a pivotal thing, let's go ahead and award you inspiration. I've never had players oppose and say, oh, that doesn't require inspiration, I don't think that meets the standards. So mainly because I think for them, it's a currency that they all want to use and have. You know, more inspiration within the party, the better it is for the party. That being said, as the DM, I do reserve what I call my veto power. I think there's only been 1 or 2 times I invoked my veto power and said, you know what, that doesn't quite meet what I would qualify for inspiration. I try to reserve that for, you know, a few times here and there, because I don't want to be some sort of, you know, non-inspiration veto tyrant guy. And additionally, it helps players remember to keep in that mechanic. They're not going to be dissuaded to say, oh, well, Brian's just going to veto this anyway. That being said, there are some good things to this way of doing things, and there are some bad things. So the first thing is, one of the things I really like is it makes the players pay attention when they're not speaking. It helps them learn about the other characters. So by them having to remember, hey, it's my duty to award inspiration. They pay attention a bit more whenever somebody else is speaking, as well as pay attention a bit more to the other character, what makes them tick, what fits into what that character's MO is. Additionally, it does, like I said, already takes the burden off of me. That being said, there is a downside where people can kind of rely on it as a crutch and start to give it out a little bit too much. I haven't ran into this, but I could see it happening with some parties of always constantly trying to go through this inspiration cycle. You know, I get inspiration, I'm now going to spend it, and my party's instantly going to give it back. I haven't ran into that before. I could see maybe some situations where that might occur on some parties that try to be a little bit, power gamery. But like I said, so far I've had no issues with that, but it is a worry that was in my mind when I initially implemented this system. Additionally, instead of just granting the advantage or granting disadvantage on rolls, I have a couple different ways that characters can spend inspiration. The first one is to gain back a spent resource during a dire moment. The party might say, or the player's turn is going on, and they're like, you know what, I really wish I still had my lay on hands. I spent it, damn, I just wish I had it. And I'll say, you know what, you have your inspiration, you trade me that inspiration, I'll give you maybe half your lay on hands, or I might give you a level 3 spell or something like that. Give you a little bit of trade-off. That way, it's kind of this like wonderful boost that they're not asking. Typically, when this happens, they don't say, you know what, can I trade you this for inspiration? It's never been like that. It's always been a player kind of listening, hey, I want to do this. And then I say, you know what, you give me that inspiration back, and I will go ahead and allow you to do that. Additionally, is there's we all know the rule of cool, right? When you want to go with something cool, typically let it happen. But I also like to use inspiration as rule of cool currency. I might make if you plan out this really cool sequence of things you want to do, I might make the checks really hard, but you know what? Instead, you can just trade me that inspiration, and either the checks are lowered or I waive the checks altogether, depending on how cool that sequence is. Not saying I always impose checks on cool sequences and that kind of things, but some of the sequences that people think about are really complex, and to get that out there without checks, I think, is just a little bit unfair to other players that just don't have that imagination. So those are just a couple different ways that I like to use inspiration. And like I said, I really like the idea of the party managing inspiration. First off, it takes the burden off of me, and then it has the benefit of people paying attention a bit more, and the party being a bit more involved in other characters' stories as well as just their own character story. So yeah, let's go ahead and cover into some other stuff. We're going to wrap up with talking about what I consider to be inspiration's weakest point, which is characters forget that they have it, and a couple ways that I've tried to work around that problem and how to solve it. So the first one is make sure that inspiration is going out a decent amount. If people only get inspiration here and there, they tend to hoard it. So giving inspiration on regular intervals helps players remember, let's use this mechanic and not just hoard it or else it goes to waste. With the idea that you can only ever have one inspiration die at a time per player, if a player's granted inspiration again, they feel like they kind of wasted that moment. And so they now have an inspiration die that's floating off in space away from them that they can no longer use. So by keeping that floating around, it reminds them, let's use this mechanic. Additionally, I like to have some sort of visual cue. I thought about the idea of handing out poker chips or playing cards and that kind of thing in the past. However, last year at the end of our Rise of Tiamat and Horde of the Dragon Queen campaigns, I created the inspiration die holders a la the DM Scotty method, and I handed them out to my players. Each one had a different model there to be used, or different model creature to be representative of the player, and there are all sorts of cool mythical beasts. This one's mine. And the die goes right up top here. Let me grab a die. Sorry about the reach over. But when they have inspiration, they put a die up top, and it's a visual reminder to say, hey, there's a inspiration that you can use at any moment. For the most part, I won't lie, I think the players have gotten away from using those. Some players do still use them, and some of the players since we do Adventure League games, went to different tables with the season switch. So I'm not sure if those ones still use it, but I'd like to see, or I'd like to say that at least some of them still use that inspiration as a, or die holder as a visual reminder. Like I said, some people will use playing cards or poker chips. I've thought about doing that in the past. Before I stumbled across the video on how to make these, I thought about doing some sort of poker chip with a custom symbol painted on that as well to represent inspiration. The players would hand it back to me. But this is something that they can keep and they can take around with it. So that worked out pretty well. And, it was a fun project to do. So yeah, that's the main thing. Give it out. Make sure that players have that visual reminder. I think that visual reminder, it has really helped as well. For the people that use the inspiration die holders or have some way to track it, I've noticed that they tend to spend inspiration a bit more than the players that don't, and just use that little checkbox on their character sheet there. So that being said, I think we're going to go ahead and wrap up. Let's do a quick recap, though. We talked about the basics of the inspiration die, a couple of the different ways that I allow inspiration to be used, as well as a different mechanic for using it. And I didn't create that. That's something that was in the DMG, and I read it, and I was like, you know what, that's a great idea. It takes the burden off the DM. And then, some ways to get your players to remember to start spending it. Give it to them on a regular interval and have some sort of visual cue. I both of those together, using that, you should get your players going through their inspiration on a pretty regular basis. So let me know if you guys have had any good success stories with inspiration, different mechanics that you've used, different ways to implement it, or different ways to spend it, or if you've had any horror stories. I can't imagine there would be any horror stories from inspiration, but you know what? You never know. And let's be honest here, people like talking about the horror stories of the world, and, puppies and unicorns are great, but that beholder that's very mean is so much more better, right? So take care, everybody, and enjoy.